Hey guys, today we are looking at the question of whether PUFAs are toxic, or to put it in more detail. This is a question on yesterday's video from Stephen Hazel, who says, "I thought we were supposed to stay the heck away from omega 6 and to a lesser extent omega 3s as they break down into toxins if you have any excess." So I'm summarizing this question as our PUFAs or polyunsaturated fatty acids, the omega 6 and omega 3 essential fatty acids, are PUFAs toxic? Before we get there, let me just remind everyone that this week I just published the Cliff Notes, the Vitamins and Minerals 101 Cliff Notes. You can get that at you can get them at chrismasterjohnphd.com/Cliff Notes, or I'll put a link in the description. It's basically all the key insights from the last 15 years of my research, all collated into one place in a 27-page PDF for half the price of a fancy coffee at Starbucks. It's $2.99. Response has been overwhelmingly positive from it. So I had a questionnaire, and I think 41 people responded. It was just last night that I released it. And so 41 people responded with about 80-20 saying it was excellent, 80% saying excellent, 20% very good. A bunch of people left 5-star reviews as well. So $2.99, chrismasterjohnphd.com/Cliff Notes. Okay, so Stephen's question is, I thought we were supposed to stay the heck away from omega 6 and to a lesser extent omega 3 as they break down into toxins if you have any excess. Well, this is sort of true, but I wouldn't quite put it that way. And the difference between what I think is true and exactly how that is put comes up with differences in basic practicality of what you should do with your diet. And so let's hit that first. So, practically speaking, if you come from the point of view that PUFAs are toxic, period, or you come from the view that PUFAs are toxic if you have any excess above the basic requirement, then you're going to design your diet primarily around PUFA restriction. And I I would put it quite differently. And in fact, there's an article that I'll link to in the description that I wrote many years ago called Precious but Perilous about the polyunsaturated fats, the essential fatty acids. And that title is basically encapsulating my view, which is that uh, precious because A, we need them, and B, we need to treat them very carefully. As opposed to just, if you just say essential, we need them, right? But precious means essential, very important, but be careful with it. And perilous means, yes, there are dangers. And so, on a practical level, what I think we should do with our diet is consider three things. One is, what do we encounter as PUFAs on the way to acquiring all the essential vitamins and minerals that we need from our food? Then, for that matter, macronutrients, right? You need to hit a certain protein target. You need to hit a certain target for a couple dozen plus vitamins and minerals. And there's no way on earth that avoiding some marginal increase in PUFA at the expense of becoming deficient in another vitamin, in a vitamin or mineral, is going to be worth it. And so I do think, and at my upcoming book, Vitamins and Minerals 101, How to Get the Nutrients You Need on Any Diet, the first chapter after the introduction is going to make the case for a food first approach. I do think that, although I'm fine with supplements, I do think that you do want to try to meet all your basic targets to the extent you can from your foods, providing that you can do that within, within the confines of whatever dietary or ethical restrictions you have. As long as you can, try to meet your needs for vitamins and minerals from foods. And so you might face a question where, maybe maybe for me, with the things that I like to eat, the tastes that I have, what happens to be a sustainable habit for me, given the time that I have to prepare food, maybe I am eating a certain amount of nuts in order to hit my magnesium target. Maybe I'm going to be deficient magnesium otherwise. And, maybe the other foods available to me are, are too difficult for me to fit in, or I'm allergic to certain things or whatever. I would say in that case, chill out and eat the nuts. Not saying you should go crazy eating nuts. I'm just saying, if it comes down to a question of whether you are trying to avoid a marginal increase in PUFAs versus obtaining an essential nutrient, always make the choice in favor of obtaining the essential nutrient. Second thing would be, are you hitting the target for the essential fatty acids? And these targets are really small, but I've outlined them in the cliff notes. For example, arachidonic acid, you want to hit 133 milligrams a day or so. And so, you're looking at these things of basically eating, an egg yolk or two a day, or liver twice a week, or fatty fish 2 or 3 times a week. And as I pointed out yesterday, if you are an adult and you are not really experiencing growth or recovery or repair, you're not getting pregnant, you're just kind of, going along life without really encountering anything, you're probably not going to develop any deficiency symptoms in response to not hitting that target. But that can change very easily. If you get into bodybuilding, if you start a sport, if you get injured and you need to recover, if you become pregnant, or, certainly for children, they're just always growing. Any of these things can happen and can take you from adequate status of these fatty acids and push you into inadequate status, or put you into a deficiency zone. And so you might not notice the need to hit the target, but I still think we should be trying to hit those targets anyway. And then the third thing you want to consider is, do you have any deficiency signs or symptoms that you can plausibly attribute to not having enough of that fatty acid? Because there may be something increasing your need. And in yesterday's video, I talked about using blood tests to try to make sure you're at least in the middle, preferably the higher end of the range for arachidonic acid and DHA. If you're not doing blood tests, then you want to look out for the signs and symptoms of deficiencies of those fatty acids, to see if they are present. You may want to raise your intake of those to see if the problem's resolved. So if you have poor immunity, or you have gut problems, or you have eczema, or you have anxiety, or you have aversive behavior, or you have a neurological condition that, maybe it's peripheral neuropathy, or, maybe your vision's declining, or maybe you just feel like your cognitive health is declining. All of these, that first set up through the vision and cognitive health is mainly signs and symptoms of arachidonic acid deficiency. The last few are DHA. If you have those, see if they respond to diet, right? So basically the 3 rules are: you need to get your vitamins and minerals, you need to hit the targets for the essential fatty acids, and then you need to be open-minded about increasing your intake of those fatty acids if you have a set of signs or symptoms that could be plausibly attributed to deficiency that respond to increases in those intakes. Now, that's one thing. It's also the case that these fatty acids are broken down into toxic byproducts that may play a role in disease. Generally speaking, chronic degenerative diseases involve a significant component of oxidative stress and or oxidative damage. And, I think if we're looking at cancer, we're looking at heart disease, or we're looking at really any kind of degenerative disease, there's generally some component of that. And just aging in general, skin quality during the course of aging. I think all of these can involve, or generally do involve, oxidative stress, and that can involve damage to these fatty acids. But I would disagree with Stephen, I would disagree with you just on the point of what drives the breakdown of these fatty acids into toxic byproducts. And so I don't think it's that if you have any excess above the basic requirement. I think, you know, and actually, there's numerous resources that I've done on this that cover this in much more detail that I'll provide in the description. Um, but my article, Precious Yet Perilous, would be one thing. And then I have a whole series of videos that are on YouTube and are on my website on the antioxidant system. It's a 12 episode series where I cover the antioxidant system. And so, one thing that is true is that if you increase the PUFAs in your cell membranes, there is some extent to which the antioxidant system is not going to be fully protective. And the reason is that the first antioxidant in the cell membrane is vitamin E. And vitamin E is what we call a chain breaking antioxidant. Its role is to break the lipid peroxidation chain reaction that can occur. So if in a reactive oxygen species such as superoxide or hydrogen peroxide reaches the cell membrane, um, it has the potential to encounter a polyunsaturated fatty acid and oxidize it. If it does, that can set off a chain reaction where the oxidized byproduct, which can be toxic, will just take the next PUFA and oxidize it, take the next PUFA and oxidize it. And it's like a series of falling dominoes. So vitamin E's job is to come in and break that chain reaction by sacrificing itself to prevent the next domino from falling. So a reactive oxygen species encounters a PUFA in the cell membrane and oxidizes it. Vitamin E will come in and get oxidized by that lipid. And then that makes the whole chain reaction stop. And it initiates a different chain reaction. So instead of one lipid oxidizing the next, oxidizing the next, oxidizing the next, the first lipid oxidizes vitamin E, then vitamin E oxidizes vitamin C, then vitamin C oxidizes glutathione, then glutathione oxidizes NADPH, which is a derivative of niacin. Then NADPH oxidizes riboflavin. Actually, I have that backwards. Riboflavin, then, so first FADH2 gets oxidized within the enzyme glutathione reductase. Then that oxidizes NADPH. And then NADPH is basically oxidizing glucose through or a derivative of glucose through the pentose phosphate pathway. To put that another way, you can imagine an electron flowing first from a glucose molecule through the through the pentose phosphate pathway, and that electron's going to NADPH. Then NADPH is bringing it to riboflavin within the glutathione reductase enzyme. Then it's being passed on from glutathione to vitamin C to vitamin E, to then that electron that initially came from glucose is then going to quench the oxidized PUFA in the cell membrane and put that chain reaction to rest. Now, the reason that there is some truth to the fact that some marginal increase in PUFA in the cell membrane will not be fully protected by the vitamin E or that whole system that's present is that when the reactive oxygen species first reaches the membrane, it will never oxidize vitamin E first. Vitamin E is a chain-breaking antioxidant. It is not an antioxidant that prevents the initiation of lipid peroxidation. And so we basically can separate the lipid peroxidation events in the cell membrane into the initiation phase, which is when the reactive oxygen species first makes it there, and the propagation phase, which is the chain reaction. So what vitamin E does is it prevents the propagation phase, and it does nothing for the initiation phase. Now, if you don't have vitamin E in the cell membrane, and one reactive oxygen species gets there, and they're deficient enough in vitamin E, that chain reaction could just destroy the entire cell membrane. Generally speaking, almost no one is ever that deficient in vitamin E. Um, usually we have some vitamin E in the membrane. So on a more practical purpose, what's generally happening is, well, if your antioxidant system's not well supported, then you might have maybe a little bit of the lipid peroxidation chain reaction, but not too much. Um, but there's basically nothing you can do to, once the reactive oxygen species makes it there, to stop initiation. And so does that mean that you should design your whole diet around, most centrally around, making sure that there's no marginal increase above what's needed in the cell membrane? Well, I don't think so, because let's say that, and I realize that this, there's many sources of magnesium, and so this is kind of a silly example, but I'm just taking it as a random example. You could come up with all kinds of permutations of, when you're going to make a trade-off between getting an essential nutrient versus avoiding a PUFA. So I'm just going to use the magnesium nut example, not because it's the be all end all or the perfect example, just because it's one example of a trade-off. So let's say that you were so avoidant of PUFAs that you said, okay, I'm not going to eat nuts, and in the net balance of your diet, you wound up with a marginal deficit of 30% less magnesium than you needed, um, but you avoided any marginal increase in PUFA above what you needed. Well, in that case, yeah, you might have some less PUFA in certain cell membranes, and that's it's not going to be it's going to be different for every cell membrane. So, like in the nervous system, the PUFA content of the cell membrane is exceedingly tightly regulated. But there are other cell membranes, especially in certain parts of the liver, especially in adipose tissue. But there's many places where the cell membrane's PUFA content is relatively responsive to diet. So you might have uh, less PUFA in that cell membrane, but with a 30% deficit in magnesium, you might not be synthesizing enough ATP to synthesize glutathione, for example. And glutathione is not just going to play a role in assisting vitamin E to break the chain reaction. Glutathione is also going to help through is also going to help neutralize hydrogen peroxide to water. So you might have less hydrogen peroxide in total reaching the cell membrane in the first place, and then you do prevent initiation. And so if you look at that, puzzle in that way, you can go, like, if you go through my antioxidant 12-part antioxidant series, which I'll link to in the description, get this in much more detail. But from the point where from the point where a reactive oxygen species is first generated, you're looking at a bunch of nutrients like manganese, zinc, copper, selenium, everything needed for glutathione synthesis. We covered this in a lot of detail in the thyroid video I did the other day. But everything needed for glutathione synthesis, so protein, glycine, magnesium, support for energy, etc. All those things are helping neutralize reactive oxygen species before they ever get to the cell membrane. And so those things are impacting initiation. And so I do agree, Stephen, I do agree with you that we should avoid more PUFAs than we need. But the way that I would phrase that is, I wouldn't say we should stay the heck away from these, because I think that creates a sort of idea or a framework or a way of looking at it that makes PUFA restriction the central thing you should be doing with your diet. And I think that can very easily lead you to make decisions about your diet that would compromise other things that you're not thinking about. So basically, the gist of what I have to say here is look at the big picture. even if your primary goal is to prevent PUFAs from oxidizing into toxic byproducts, which they do, which they can, which they will, you are not just thinking about, and actually, there's even a case to have the right amount of PUFAs in the cell membrane, right? So in the last video, we were talking about getting enough arachidonic acid, enough DHA. Well, DHA in the membrane, when it gets oxidized, has signaling properties that will help increase the antioxidant defenses. You could have a situation where you have plenty of linoleic acid from vegetable oils in the cell membrane, which is very easily oxidized. But if it doesn't have the same capacity to upregulate the defenses as DHA has, then by not having enough DHA in the cell membrane, you are basically compromising your antioxidant defense. So if you look at the big picture, yes, you want to prevent lipid peroxidation in the cell membrane, but what does that entail for how you should design your diet? Well, you do want no more PUFAs than what you need, but you also need enough vitamin E, you need enough vitamin C, you need enough all the factors that support glutathione synthesis, such as protein, carbs, insulin, polyphenols, glycine, magnesium, and ATP. From ATP, you need enough of all the B vitamins, and you need enough of the antioxidant enzyme mineral cofactors, namely manganese, zinc, copper, selenium, and I forgot to mention before, iron for the enzyme catalase. And so you're looking at 2/3 of the essential nutrients playing central roles here. And so that's why I think the basic implication for diet design is, get the first, make sure you're getting all your vitamins and minerals. If it comes down to a trade-off of restricting PUFA versus getting adequate vitamins and minerals, make the decision in favor of getting adequate vitamins and minerals. Make sure that you're getting arachidonic acid and DHA up to optimal levels. And then if you appear to have plausible signs of deficiency, in the case of arachidonic acid, examples could include eczema, could include anxiety or an elevated stress response, could include gut problems of all sorts, could include poor immunity. In the case of DHA, could include poor cognitive function, could include declining vision, could include, in severe cases, could include peripheral neuropathy. But if you have any signs of deficiency, you want to see if those are responsive to increases in the intakes of those fatty acids. Now, do you want any extra beyond that? No, I would say at that point, you want to very much avoid more PUFA than you need, providing you fulfill those criteria. But I don't think avoiding PUFA should be the central goal of your diet. Okay, so I'm going to list in the description a few other things that I've done on this. I think my article, Preciosia Perilis, on the Weston Price site, the antioxidant course, the 12-part antioxidant course that I made, and another, I think, key point would be my analysis of the randomized controlled trials where PUFAs were substituted for traditional oils in order to prevent heart disease. And the sort of too long didn't watch version of that is that there were numerous trials where they tried to prevent heart disease by replacing saturated fats or other traditional fats that were higher in saturated fatty acids with vegetable oils that were higher in PUFA in order to prevent heart disease, on the basis that doing so would decrease cholesterol levels. And there's some indication that if the population is old enough, that increases the risk of cancer, and that's concerning. And it's a real mess to try to say whether it impacts heart disease one way or the other. you really cannot make a strong case that increasing PUFAs improves heart disease outcomes. But you also really can't make a clear case that increasing PUFAs causes heart disease either. And I personally think that that's because um, when you decrease cholesterol levels, you do lower the risk of heart disease. But when you increase PUFAs to do that, you are also increasing the liability within the LDL particles of PUFAs that can oxidize, and that oxidize the LDL particle, which contributes to heart disease. So I think you have these conflicting effects that are hard to resolve. And so I think because of those conflicting mechanisms, ultimately adding PUFAs or taking them away has a very wishy-washy relationship with heart disease. Um, but I think the possibility that they may contribute to cancer, and the fact that when you take out their effect on lowering cholesterol levels, there seems to be some residual component that is aggravating the oxidative stress that can contribute to heart disease. I do think that makes a case for why you don't want to just take out all the traditional natural foods that you had and put in PUFA-rich vegetable oils. Um, but there are no series of randomized controlled trials in humans that are any better than that set. The only time we ever did long randomized controlled trials on PUFA substitution for traditional fats, which should be the best evidence we have on human health and disease, was in those heart disease trials, right? So the essential um, the essential series of evidence to answer this question of, are PUFAs toxic, or do we want to increase or decrease PUFAs beyond what we need? The only place to go for an answer to that, in my opinion, is that evidence on heart disease. And the other things they found over the course in it, like incidentally finding that the PUFAs might increase the risk of cancer. Because at the end of the day, the only other evidence that we have is from animals or logical speculation about mechanisms. And so, if all we have besides that is animal evidence and logical speculation about mechanisms, and we have these series of heart disease trials, we have to look at those as the primary evidence. And so I would say overall that evidence is, it has some hints that it's not really the best thing, probably not really safe to spend the rest of your life replacing traditional fats with high PUFA vegetable oils. But it's not a it's not an open and it's not a tight case. It's the evidence is wishy-washy and it doesn't look good. But it's nowhere near the state where we could say, well, anything above X grams of linoleic acid is toxic and will kill you. So when I look at that, I say, well, okay, there's obviously downside risk to too much PUFAs. And yet there's obviously downside risk to not getting enough arachidonic acid and DHA into your cell membranes. There's obvious downside risk to avoiding foods that have PUFAs if it means you become deficient in any one of a number of couple dozen plus other nutrients. And if you're deficient, you have deficiency signs or symptoms for essential fatty acids that respond to increasing these fatty acids and make those signs and symptoms go away, then I wouldn't even describe that as downside risk. There was a problem that you solved with those fatty acids. So, step out and look at the bigger picture. To prevent lipid peroxidation, we're not just thinking about PUFA restriction. We're thinking about getting all those nutrients that support the antioxidant system. And then, when we're defining how much of these fatty acids we need, we're not just thinking of hitting the basal requirement. We're also thinking of making sure we don't have any deficiency signs and symptoms. And we're also thinking about not restricting our diet to give us deficiencies of something else. And then at that point, as long as you have those bases covered, then yeah, I wouldn't be consuming high PUFA foods and especially PUFA-rich oils over and above those things. So that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll try to do this again tomorrow. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget to get the Cliff Notes at chrismasterjohnphd.com/cliffnotes. See you guys later.